It is story time, and today I'm going to talk about back in the 1980s. I was in a relationship with a guy, Jim, who joined a group of, they called themselves Patriots. I had no idea what that meant for them, but they were basically opposed to any kind of government control or supervision. They didn't want license plates, they didn't want to have to carry insurance, gun licensing, paying taxes, driver's licenses. I mean, it just, anything controlled or supervised or managed by government, they were opposed to that. And to a degree, I probably owe my legal career to this group of patriots, because one of the things that the thing that they were protesting most strenuously was the federal income tax. And so Jim started bringing home this information about what the Internal Revenue Service was up to. And back in the 80s, the Internal Revenue Service was completely out of control. They were like gangsters. They were really like gangsters. In one case, they went into a nursery school. They wouldn't release the children to the parents because the school owed taxes. And so in order for the parents to get their kids, they had to pay the school right then and there whatever they owed them. People were committing suicide because the Internal Revenue Service was harassing them so badly. And it just seemed to me it was a very un-American organization. And it didn't show up in Title 26, which is the U.S. Code title on money and finances. And you would think that there would be a great big thing about how the Internal Revenue Service is set up and the agency and different parts of it. There was nothing at all. There was Internal Revenue Service with small I, small r, small s, but that was for Guam, Puerto Rico, and some other islands that were possessions or affiliated. It was not. I just never saw that there really was something about the Internal Revenue Service set up in Title 26. But one of the things that the Patriots ended up talking about was that you couldn't test attorneys. You could not test attorneys. They would sell you down the river or something, and so you had to do it yourself. Well, what I did do is, among other things, I went to the Supreme Court Library in New Orleans. We lived right outside New Orleans at the time. And I started looking up some of these cases the Patriots were citing. And it just seemed as though the tax code was slipped in very... It wasn't done right. It just was not done right. And in the beginning, the tax was supposed to be just simply taxing 1% of the population, only those people who had a whole lot of money. And slowly, it kind of increased and it got bigger and bigger. But what I discovered in doing research is that you have to assess yourself in order for you to have a liability. And I decided at that point in time, and I was not working for anybody. I was a stay-at-home gal, and so I didn't have a confrontation immediately. But when I next worked for someone, I signed a withholding exempt because I really wanted the Internal Revenue Service to change the way it operated. And but at the same time, I was paying New Mexico taxes because, in principle, I like the idea of, sharing wealth. Although it's not working out too well nowadays, the wealth seems to be going all the way to the top, and the people at the bottom are really doing very badly. But back then, I paid taxes to the state, but then I signed my withholding exempt. And in the fullness of time, the Internal Revenue Service notified me that they were missing my tax return, and they wanted to know why I hadn't filed and all that other stuff. And so in order to get this going, you have to be the one to petition. When they say you owe money or you didn't file a return, they make you petition as a taxpayer. So now you have just taken on, you have just given them jurisdiction over you. So I did that. I went to tax court, and this was like around 90, 91, I think. And it was interesting because I had requested what was called individual master file. Everybody who pays a tax to the federal government, they make a master file on you, and the whole thing is in code. Unless you have the coding manual, you have no idea what it says. I happen to have the decoding manual, which is the 6209 manual, gotten under the Freedom of Information Act. So I had the manual, when under the Freedom of Information Act, my individual master file records came in, and lo and behold, the code on there was I did not have an obligation to file or pay. So now I'm in tax court, and I'm bringing these documents to the attention of the judge, and the judge, he was promoted from an Internal Revenue Service agent to a judge. So he was really on the side of the Internal Revenue Service. You know, it was part and parcel of what he was doing. The judge said to me, well, they must have made a mistake. Now, the Internal Revenue Service never alleged that they had made a mistake, and the judge had no business defending the Internal Revenue Service, but that's what he did. Anyway, he issued an order saying that he was fining me for not filing, not for not paying, because I still didn't owe a tax, right? So I thought, well, this is really a bullshit order, because if you don't owe a tax, you don't have a requirement to file. So I brought that to the attention of the judge, and he was nice enough to reform his order and make me liable for taxes and for filing. So then I applied to the 10th Circuit Court, which is part of the states, including New Mexico. And that court said, well, you're out of time. You should have filed this when the judge gave you the first order, which was, of course, the bullshit order, right? So that court did not want to touch this. So then I applied to the Supreme Court of the United States. And, of course, they didn't want to do that. They didn't want to look at this either. And so eventually the Internal Revenue Service, I think they assessed $10,000, something like that. They filed a lien in the county records. Now, I owned property, but I owned it under my married name, and apparently they just couldn't be bothered doing the work to figure out that my prior name was the married name. So I decided at some point, well, I'm going to sell this property, I'm going to go to Florida, buy a boat, learn to sail, got a children's book, and I did all that. And then in the fullness of time, the lien expired. So I never did pay that fine. It was an interesting part of my life. I was much braver back in those days, and my actions multiplied by thousands. There were thousands of us. Thousands of us took on the Internal Revenue Service, and the end result of that was that Congress created the Taxpayer's Bill of Rights. So my work and the work of others who resisted had a good outcome, and it's important to resist government tyranny. And we are going to be seeing a whole lot of government tyranny with Donald Trump at the helm. He's going to make life as miserable as he can for as many people as possible who are not on his side or in his camp. We've already seen, that the people who pick our veggies and fruits are not showing up to work because they're afraid of being gathered together and deported. And it probably won't make any difference to the agents whether they have green cards or not. They're not going to be caring about details like that or legalities. So this is a message today about we do need to take some action, and we do need to resist. When we see evil, don't just let it go past you. If you can, do something. You'll be pleased in the end that you did. And it's going to take all of us working together to survive this godless, unjust, disgusting. Well, I really don't want to end on that kind of a note. I do want us to be strong. I do want us to pay attention. I do want us to be helpful. Do not let the Trump administration get away with this. We are better than what's happening in this country right now. we're braver, we're kinder, we're more loving. And Trump does not represent most of us. Only 1/3 of the American public actually voted for that monster. And they can congratulate themselves for every loss that they will experience. And they will be experiencing losses. It's not just going to be the Democrats. In any event, I want us to be strong, to be courageous, and most of all, to be kind. So that's my message for today. Bye.